Greetings. I'm Steve, and I'd like to thank you for joining the Architect and the Executive podcast, where we discuss technology, philosophy, leadership, personal development, and much more. The theme for each episode varies as we endeavor to examine various topics from our unique points of view. I hope you enjoy this episode of The Architect and the Executive. In this episode of The Architect and the Executive, we talk about remote team building, team management, and how to make it look like you're a mind reader. Of course, we all know you're not going to read minds, but we're going to help you understand how to set expectations, work with your team, and whether you're a manager or a team member, how to make sure that everyone's on the same page as you're working remotely and everyone's trying to get all of the various things that are going on throughout the day done. We hope you enjoy this episode of The Architect and the Executive.
Hey, Steve, how's it going?
It is going really well, Imran. Thank you. It's been another pretty amazing week and pretty eventful for us, I think, here at the Architect and the Executive, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's been probably one of the most eventful weeks so far. We launched our first episode today, on YouTube and Spotify and other places, which was exciting. And now here we are recording our second.
I know. Here we are on number 2, and this time going through and talking about remote teams and management and building a team remotely. And if you think about the brave new world that we're in and the fact that everyone kind of has to be remote now,
yep.
I think this is one of those areas where you and I really have a unique perspective, given that we've been fully remote for, the last 2.5 going on 3 years, almost 3 years. Wow.
Yeah, almost
That's
3
amazing.
years for us. I think the company itself has been remote since it was incepted in 2009. And so that was kind of part of what, drove at least my desire to write about some of this stuff was, hey, we came into a pretty well-established remote work from home culture, and we were able to take that and run with it and expound on it. And so why not share some of what we learned, now that there's a lot of companies who have found themselves all of a sudden becoming fully remote without having had the time to really come up with a good policy on how to do it.
Yeah, that's for sure, right? That's a great point, because we were built for this, right? This is our DNA is working remote, and how do we manage everybody remotely? I think there are still people on our team that I've never met, and that's which is amazing to think that have been in a role for more than 2.5 years and still have people that I haven't met. Although it works. We've found a way, even with all of everybody having to be on lockdown and be at home. We have found a way to take our team from like 6 people to 60, 35
in a matter of a couple of
years. QA.
Yeah. We've grown it all. Well, we came into a pretty small team. There was a handful of people, a small app, and the need to grow, right? The company itself has grown by leaps and bounds in the last few years, and we've had to really keep up with it on the dev side.
Yeah, that is so true. So as you think back to what we were doing and when we started 2.5 years ago working remote, thinking about building a remote team, what were the things that you were looking for? You mentioned that you wanted to have a work from home or a remote job, and that was interesting, but what do you look for in other people that we're working with?
Yeah, obviously it takes a sense of discipline to be able to keep track of your day without having someone around to tell you what to do or even being in that environment, right? It's very easy to get distracted at home. There are so many things going on and you're kind of at this place. And a lot of people like that separation to say, it's a different physical space. And so it has a different kind of physical energy there, right? And so when you're there, everyone around you's working, you're working versus being at home. And so for me, it's people who want to be autonomous, right? Who know how to get the job done and can take some instruction and be able to work with it, right? One of the things I wasn't sure of was how would I keep track of that, right? And how would I know that someone was doing something they needed to be doing versus, the things that I can't see that are easily seen in an office, right?
Right. You can't tell that the person's sitting around their water cooler or I guess their kitchen counter when you're working from home. Right?
Wherever their break room is, right?
Yeah, you can't tell. And I think it's been even more interesting in the last couple months with everyone being home and those of us who have kids having to deal with doing homeschooling and trying to help the kids and keeping all of that entertained. I know a lot of our teammates have children at home, I do think that the structure that we already had in place facilitated their ability to work and to do things and to be present where they needed to be. Right. If they needed to be working on something at home, great. If they needed to be doing something for work, they could figure that out as well. Right.
Right.
I think we already had that pretty
Yeah.
well in hand, but this certainly was a twist.
Definitely. And from the beginning, I think when we first spoke, and by the way, I know we didn't mention this, but I think it was 8 months before you and I met in person for the first time after we had started working together. I think it was just a couple of phone calls in a virtual world. And we just did phone calls, right? We weren't even quite in the virtual world yet.
We started everything on phone calls for interviews and all of that. And then we started working in a virtual world and our hangouts and calls and chats and everything. And yeah, you and I hit it off immediately, but you're right. We didn't meet physically. That was about 8 months later, which is
8 months into it. And we had to get to know each other though really quick because there was a lot at stake, based on our ability to work together and communicate well as we were building this team. Because aside from a dev team, you were also building a QA team. We had another colleague counterpart building up a product team. And so of course, in all of that, it's just making sure that we can stay cohesive and unified as we grow. And things kind of start to get a little out of hand, right? We went from keeping track of one team to about 14 in a short period of time.
Oh, and I think it's amazing, as I look at what we built and the fact that we now have basically a 22-hour day. Mm-hmm. There's something going on our products in our either QA or product or development, stacks. There's something going on. We have a global presence, not just the idea of having people that used to go to an office that all live in the same city.
Right.
We had people all around the world, from Germany to the Netherlands to India to Canada to I think just about every U.S. time zone.
Yep.
We're everywhere, and it's been the things that we've done and the way that we've kind of helped grow this team have really allowed that to work and our teams to flourish and people to really to grow into it, right? Like that kind of setting the expectation of what it means for online presence. And I know you'd written an article recently that you published that we'll definitely have in our show notes that was about what you think about as far as presence. And one of the things that jumped out at me, and I remember this from back in the day, was, is the green light on? Am I available, or do I show auto away? Right?
Exactly right. The chat program that was up, and that was how management was done, right? You had this list of people, and this little bubble next to them kind of told you. And even if they were home, or if they were down the row of cubicles at the end of the hall, you could tell if someone was at their desk working, and it was almost this activity monitor. Like, are they active at their desk?
And that if they're at their desk, productive. They must be working, right? That's how you could tell if their little indicator was green, then clearly they're working. And that's just has never struck me as a way to manage. And I know I've seen a number of pictures with all the COVID lockdown stuff going on where people have used like a oscillating fan and taped their mouse to it so that it keeps moving the mouse on the screen so that they always show that they're available.
Exactly.
They must be in an environment that is, do you have a green light next to your name environment? And I cannot imagine what that would be like.
No.
Right? Our team, I think, one, that people would go nuts. I would go nuts just having to check the green lights all the time. But man, I feel bad for people that are in that situation, right? Like,
well, it reminds me of a Simpsons episode when Homer first got to work from home by figuring out he can gain enough weight, and if he was over 300 pounds, then he'd be technically disabled. And so he could work from home. And so he did that. He gained enough weight to work from home, and then he realized that, so he has this computer, and then, it just asks him a bunch of these questions, and he's just hitting yes for every single one. He's like, oh, working from home, getting stuff done. And so then he quickly realizes he puts one of those it's like one of those birds, that kind of dips over over and over again. And it's just hitting yes, and it's answering all these questions yes. And it eventually leads to the plant having a meltdown, like a nuclear plant having a meltdown.
Of course.
A sequence of questions or whatever. But he thought, I can just walk away from, and I'm working from home. I'm getting something done, I've never thought that availability was a good measure of productivity. Even without the chat app, I've been at places where it was like, are you at your desk at 8:30? If not, you must not be getting anything done, right?
I've been there too.
Never mind, engineers and developers, never mind that there was a full night of development done, until 6 a.m. But it was no, were you at your desk at 8:30? If not, then you're clearly not performing.
Right. We have a problem because, your butt's not in the seat at 8:30 and, the time of day that you're working isn't anywhere near as important to me anyway. And I know it's not to you as whether or not you're actually getting things done, that you're present, right? That you're actually involved in what's going on and you're working on the things that you need to be doing. So how do you help to foster that culture, right? If you think about, we don't want to have the green light mentality of, are you, online? How do you then build that up so that people they have a desire, right, to be there and go get the work done that's assigned to them? How do you look at that? How do you build that sense of belonging or connection?
I think it's, there's a lot of different ways, right? Like one, the way that you talk about your work and how it is, you have to have this sense of a delivery being the measure, right? What you deliver, what you produce is how we measure your success, not how many hours are you sitting in front of your desk or what those hours are, right? And a lot of that came from, it was really your style, right? You have a good philosophy about this and, you've said it a lot of times, and I'll say it now. It's we're all adults, right? And we have work to do, and we have to get it done. And nobody wants to be told when to do, what to do. But, the projects are there, the tasks are there, the stories are there, right? Whatever things are that need to be built are defined and designed. And so it's about pick it up and do it. Now, if you have to be in a meeting at a certain time, you have to be at a meeting. Outside of that, how you plan your day, right? And we leave it up to you to plan your day. If you work best at night and that's when you get most of your development done, cool. That's when you do it. If you have some engagements, commitments in the day, you've got a family, kids, doctor's appointments, schools, things like that come up, that's fine. We expect you to kind of find your own balance with it, right? And that's the culture is you are trusted enough to find your own balance in life, right? I'd read something, a lot of things are posting up on LinkedIn, right, lately with all this COVID stuff and everyone working from home. And one of the questions posed was like, if you can't trust your people to do their job from home, why hire them in the first place, right?
That's a great point, right? I'm not sure I've ever really thought about that. I'm hiring someone for a reason, right? They have a skill and the ability to do something. I do expect that they're an adult, right? I set that expectation. You're right. That is one of my driving core principles, that I need you to be an adult and to do your job.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine that situation where you're like, oh no, I have to have you sitting next to me so I know you're working. Like that.
Right.
That's really hard to me. I don't. That just does not jive in my brain. I don't feel that need to really dig in like that. That's tough.
Yeah.
How do you, as you think about the team that we've built and the fact that a lot of folks haven't met, although we've done a pretty good job over the last couple of years prior to the lockdown of, getting out and meeting people. And if you and I were in Seattle, I think, earlier this year.
Beginning of this year, probably the last travel opportunity of the year.
Wow, that was this year. And we had some team members in the area, so we all got together, right? And kind of just got together for a couple hours and had dinner and got to do that, and which we do a good job of. And I think
we try and do that whenever we're somewhere in an area or region and we know we have people within a few hours distance and we say, hey, we're going to be in the area, let's plan to meet up. And whether that's come in and stay at our Airbnb or we'll get a hotel or, let's get together for dinner, drive to town, like let's get together and let's meet and, let's do some of that stuff we can't do, right? We don't get that opportunity to, hey, it's Friday, let's go to happy hour, right?
Right.
Let's go blow off some steam.
We do a little bit more than just those in-person things, though. We're fortunate. We work in a virtual world. Mm-hmm. We use the Verbella product, which is pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
Also will be in the show notes if anybody's interested. But we take time to have, I don't want to call them social hours, but earlier this week we did a lunch and learn. Our company's really good about it. They're doing brain boosts. That is that idea, same thing of a brown bag, bring your lunch and let's go talk about a topic. but we also get our developers together once a month for a show and tell of some sort, and then we get our whole team together once a month as well to talk through different sorts of things. And I think that's one of the ways that we've really kind of changed I want to say the playbook on how you work remotely, right? Because we've had time to develop this. We're not trying to react to your earlier point. We've been able to build this whole concept out over time.
Right. Yeah, and it's worked well for us, right? Because we have that culture built in. And so we don't have that same expectation, right? One of the comparisons I made is normally when you do work from home or when you get that opportunity, the expectation of the company culture is that you mimic the 9 to 5, lifestyle or the day that your in-office peers are working. And right. And there's a sense of, being able to be available at certain times, right? And we generally, in the first few hours of the day, a lot of meetings usually end up kind of running through, right? And then people spread out their day as they like. Some people have counterparts in India, so they'll start their day real early and end it earlier, right? Some people are able to start their day later. Some people might do some time in the morning, take some time in the afternoon for other things, come back later in the evening and wrap up whatever they're working on, whatever works for you, right? And a lot of people are pretty fluid. Like I'm pretty fluid on a day-to-day basis, right? I'm around generally, a slave to my calendar, right? And I have to be at a lot of places and a lot of times. And then, for the rest of it, I work on the schedule that makes the most sense for me. And some days, it makes sense to start early, and some days it makes sense to end late. And some days you do both. And then some days you can kind of get away with doing a little bit of none, right? And it just kind of depends on how things are flowing. And that's kind of another point at our company is that whole ability to flexible time off and that, if it makes sense to take some time off here or there and not have to worry about, hey, I'm using up my time or my vacation time or this and that. And as things ebb and flow, you can put those breaks in, to the year.
Yeah, you can manage your day or week or whatever it is. You mentioned it earlier, right? If you have a child that needs to go to a dentist appointment, great. Let us know, right? Tell the people that you're working with, hey, I'm going to be out for a couple hours and go take care of it. Don't sweat it. Don't worry about it. We don't want the anxiety or any of that extra baggage that comes with, I have to be away from my desk and I might show that I'm idle. Right. We don't have that. We don't want people to feel that way, that they're just not, not capable or not able to get the things done that really need to happen throughout the day. And I think that's probably one of my favorite parts about what we do. Like you, I have a ton of meetings throughout the day. I try to manage my calendar pretty well, and I block out time. Like I know some days I have a policy to review, and the best time to do that will be from 7:00 until 9:00 at night.
Right.
So I might take a couple hours midday to go get a few things done that I need to do. Maybe, prep something for dinner for the family so that while I'm working 7 to 9, we're not having to worry about that sort of thing. But it's fantastic that I know I can get that done. Right. And I'm still present. I'm still present in both of the situations I need to be, which is at work and at home. And I'm available for the folks that are around. We have, all sorts of chat. I think the communication tools that we have and that are generally available make the idea of working from home and still being connected tremendously easy.
Right. And I think that point is really important you just made about being able to be present in both. And I think when that culture is there, it's like, I'm going to sneak away from my desk for an hour to get something done or go to the school thing. But it's this anticipation that if something comes up, it's going to be negative, right? Or if I can't. So being able to say, hey, and we foster that culture of communication, like just let your team know, hey, I have to step away for an hour. If this one thing is covered here, whatever it is, or whatever it might be, right? I have to step away, even if whatever. And then you just say, hey, I can go now, and now I can go be present in the other thing. If I'm doing something with my kid or another task or another errand, I have to go to the driver's license office, something that's only open during the day, right? I can go be present at that thing and not be worrying and it kind of helps with that anxiety and that other, it just lets you have a better sense of well-being about your work and where you are, knowing that flexibility is there.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it takes me back to something you said earlier: is that we look at delivery, right? That's
Hmm.
what's important to us. So everybody has things that they're doing. They have a job, right? They're an adult. They have a job. They're assigned to a project, or they're working on things. Maybe they have to go test something. As you think about what we do, how do we help our teams keep track so that we know that the work's being done, right? And I have also written about the idea of managing remotely and the concept of manage by walking around, right? The
Right,
Sam
right.
Walton technique, but that's obviously not available here. So if we think about delivery, do you give all of your people a checklist of what they have to go do each day, or do you have a different way that you keep track of what's happening?
Yeah, I personally don't give everyone a checklist of what they have to do in the day, right? Most of my people are spread across other functional teams, and a lot of their work varies depending on the cadence of their particular team and what they're working on. So they'll generally have a list of things to do that comes from somewhere, whether it's a combination of this local dev lead or the product owner, project manager who's putting together user stories and requirements for the sprint. And for us, it's really, I could go and check. I have various tools that would let me know exactly how many changes are being committed, right? Who's doing what and what's there. But ultimately, it's not that complicated, right? And it goes back to the presence thing. I think it's easy to tell someone's presence and where they are when they have tasks and when we're working on them. And we check in on a regular basis. Every meeting does some kind of, or excuse me, every team does some kind of stand-up meeting where on a
Right.
regular basis they'll get together and say, hey, here's what I'm working on, here's what I'm stuck with, right? And we come in and make sure that we know that we're moving all the things that people are stuck with so they can continue thriving and working and doing what they need to do, right? And so that daily
Yeah.
check-in helps us prevent blocks and things like that. And the other thing is we have a culture where we accept failure as learning. And so when someone comes or if they're working on something and stuck on something, there's no fear or should be no fear of, hey, this took a day longer than I expected. I've actually never really been hard on hey, how many hours is this going to take, right? I mean, it's almost kind of a ridiculous thing. The team is spread out all over when it comes to skills and knowledge. So it's really, how long do you think you're going to take to make it? All right, it's going to take me a day or two or however long or whatever that relative sizing exercise that each team goes through for the sprints, right? And then we
Right.
come back in the retrospective and we just say, hey, this took longer than expected. Why not? But having the ability to come back and demo and say, hey, I worked on this, and having multiple resources, right? Every developer has several mentors or people they can reach out to, with whether it be a dev lead, me, or a different organizational lead within the team that they can say, hey, I'm stuck on this and I need some help, right?
Yeah, I think there was a lot in there that you just said, right? That there's no checklist, right? We're not trying to assign a bunch of tasks that we want people to go get done on this particular day.
Right.
I don't do that either. I don't have time to go build a task list for someone else. I make mine,
Right.
right? Both you and I use a pretty awesome tool. No affiliation with them other than that we use them, but
Yeah.
Sunsama is amazing for keeping track of all the things you need to do in a day. It's a pretty handy calendar / task list that I use for what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But I don't want to spend the time going through to say, are all of the people that I work with doing a task list and getting those things done? I'm also about delivery. And I know that those things are being completed when I see a demo or we have a conversation, like you mentioned in a stand up, where someone says, oh, and you can see how this piece over here is interacting with this other piece. And hey, by the way, we found a spot where we have questions. Well, you don't find a spot that you have questions if you're not doing some work,
Right.
right? If you're not investigating and working on it, you're not asking questions. And those are the times that do make me wonder when people are like, oh, no, I'm still working on it, but they have no interaction with anyone and they're not asking any questions. Then they're either stuck and they don't want to ask for help, or they're not really focused on that piece. And that's
Right.
one of the kind of the tells, right? If you think about it, your poker face, that if you're not speaking up in any of the meetings and you don't ever have anything to offer, then you're probably not as comfortable in whatever that task is, and you probably do need help. And that's a sign that I think you use as well, to go reach out and have a private conversation with that person to make sure that they're they're able to contribute and deliver.
Right. And we're all about making sure people can be successful. And that's what it's all about, right? And not anything
Yeah.
else. And it's easy to tell, right? That was one of the things when we first started, we brought on someone and had him work on a proof of concept project for us, right? And
Yeah.
we didn't, and some of the things we learned from, right? This was, I think, one of our very first ones, right? And we weren't doing a regular stand up, but we would reach out, right? Email, a text every day. How's it going?
Right.
What do you need?
Yep.
We knew it was something unique he was doing. Otherwise, proof of concept, right? That's why. So can you solve this problem? We have no idea how long it's going to take or if it can even be done. So it's a very open-ended thing, right? And so we had a lot of leniency in it to say, okay, hey, how long is this taking? You're working on it. It's been a couple of days, been a week. But, whenever he did reach back to us, he would always say, hey, I'm stuck on something else, but I got it. I know what to do. It's going to just take a little bit longer. But we never really got any details on what the problem was or how we could potentially help. And we didn't really always get the responses in time. And there was potentially some fear there to say, hey, man, I have nothing to show, so I don't want to show. But I think coming to me after a day or two and saying, I can't figure this out, here's what I've tried, is plenty to show, right? And
it
to
is.
say,
Agreed.
no one says it had to be solved in a day or two. We just need to see it's being done. And so it was pretty easy to tell, and then of course, it was very evident one day when you saw saw some tweets, live from somewhere where, and it was clear that there was like some lies going on, right? And so
there was somebody that was struggling with the personal motivation to work from home.
Yeah.
And, failing a couple of those really simple things, right? Be an adult and do your job weren't really there, and they weren't communicating. That is pretty funny. I haven't thought about that particular individual in quite a while. But for those managers that are out there that are in this situation where they now have people working from home and they're not sure what's going on, your best option is really to have a conversation. And if you're worried that that person might, you don't want to put them on the spot in front of a group, have a one-on-one. 15 minutes of, hey, where are you? What's going on? What can I help with? And if you come at it from that perspective of what can I help you with, I think it goes a lot better. I know we have our team leads that do a lot of that. I know you personally do quite a bit of that with our developers of how can I help you with whatever it is you're doing to show, to get through a hurdle, get over whatever some challenge is, or maybe get it that, that last mile to actually deliver. Right? Those are the kind of things that make a world of difference when you're working with a remote team, especially if it's not something that you're used to doing, right? If now your company's like, oh yeah, we're all remote, congratulations. That's a challenge. And that's one of those things that I think that the managers that are listening to this that have people and they're not sure what to do, that's probably the biggest one, is the communication piece. And reach out and ask. The person working on it, you'll know, right, from that conversation if they're really engaged.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Or you'll hear a lot of things that make it pretty obvious that they're not.
Because
they're not engaged.
The flip side of that was, after that ended, and we had the next, couple of developers come in and pick up that project, we had a working proof of concept within days, and in those days, we had conversations about what was happening. Okay, this direction's not working. We're going to pivot to a different direction. All right, we're stuck here. How do we get through here? And each time we were able to provide the assistance needed, and boom, what do you know? It works. And that taught me the most important lesson, because I think that was one of my biggest fears coming into this was, aside from how we're going to have some sense of connectedness among us, is that how am I going to manage, right? I understand how I can lead in a sense, right? But how am I going to manage? And there's things that I know, and being able to know who's working on what, how things are getting done, and that we are making progress, whatever that is understanding what everyone's progress is, or level of progress, right? That velocity. Everyone works at a different speed, and it's not about forcing everyone to a specific speed. It's about understanding what everyone's optimal speed is and letting them work in that area, right? And so there's a lot of input that you need as a manager to understand this, as when you're not working with people day to day, or even being able to see them at all, right? And so that was kind of one of the things for me is being able to understand it. But it was very clear and very evident. Like I could sit back, like I said, and go review every single commit and read all the notes and even look at all the changes that are coming in to the code. But it's pretty easy to tell just from the meetings, the presence of the developers, how they're asking for help, when they need help, and then looking at what the teams produce on a sprint by sprint basis,
Right.
we can see where there's productivity and where there isn't.
Yeah, that's a much better view of what's really going on. I know I've heard people talk about, the crazy compensation schemes for developers. Oh, it's number of commits, or it's number of bugs solved, or it's this or that. Lines of code written. None of those are good ways, right? So trying to look at every check-in and be like, oh, is that really 8 hours of work in a day? That just doesn't work.
Yeah.
One of the things that took me a long time to learn, I was a developer for a very long time, is that development is very much a creative process. You're trying to solve a problem in a novel way with potentially existing tools or repurposing things that are out there, but it's a creative process. I might write a pretty amazing solution to something in 6 lines of code. I might write it in 600 lines of code. It's not that, right? I might check it in 12 times. I might check it in once when it's done. Those aren't good indicators of quality or me being engaged, but the questions that I'm asking or the other people I want to talk to or the input that I'm looking for, those are indicators of where I'm at and what my thought process is and where we are. And, for us with such a distributed microservice architecture that we've moved into, we expect now that our developers, one of the signs of making progress is what I'm doing, does it fit in my domain? Am I really thinking about it? And if it does, will any other domain also need to know about what I'm doing? And that's a sure sign to me anyway, that they're paying attention, that they understand their context and where their functionality or their product fits into the bigger picture of our platform.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense.
It's been I think about, you had mentioned a couple of the rules, and I think that's been one of the things for me. And I mentioned earlier that I also wrote an article. I shared the 4 simple rules that I have for being successful, working with me. And it's the things that I look for. Be an adult and do your job. And if you have a problem, let's talk about it. I think that's kind of what we were just focusing on was,
right.
If you're stuck on something, don't sit there and fight it, for 3 days. I used to have somebody that worked for me at a prior job that would go and spend an entire day trying to figure out a problem and then be really frustrated. I'm like, well, how about you only spend an hour? And if you can't get it, let's talk about it. Maybe just talking about it reframes it.
Right.
And maybe you get a different thought. And that was one of the things that they struggled with, because they wanted to just be able to solve it. But then at the end of a day, they would have gotten through one thing and they're super frustrated. They only got through one and they didn't really have a good answer for it. So that's part of that. But if you have a problem and you're not happy about something or you're not sure, if you don't tell me, especially remotely, like I can't always read your facial features or your body language when we're talking on the phone. In fact, it's really hard in a chat or a call.
At all. We
right?
definitely can't read minds.
Yeah. We definitely cannot read minds. So if you don't tell me, then I really do have a problem. Like I need you to step up. Obviously, like we talked about, there are a lot of signs, a lot of clues that I look for, and I know you do, about where people might be struggling or things that we hear or tension that's created. Just in that, really fortunate, our product owner, came in, our product owner, the manager product, came over to talk to me after a meeting we had earlier this week. And he's like, I definitely noticed some tension here around timing on some things that were going on. And it was a great thing for him to have picked up on. We talked about it a little bit, and the right thing to do for us and for the resources involved was to say, let's take the time component off. The schedule they were trying to meet isn't going to work. What would it look like if we said, instead of trying to do this in 3 weeks, we're going to try to do it in 6 weeks.
Right.
And all that pressure came off. And, 2 days later, one of the deliverables that we didn't think we could have until much, much later came in, because they weren't feeling the pressure of having to get it done. They were able to just kind of open up and think about it and work on it and get it done. Does that make sense? Like that anxiety.
Well, it allows you to be present. Exactly. It still allows you to focus on what you're doing instead of worrying about the future and what's going to happen if I don't deliver. Because then that's all your mind is what's going to happen if I don't deliver. And now you're just worrying about, things that don't exist. And so it's just a matter of being able to pull yourself back in. And this, would you say, is it a matter of pride almost to not be able to ask for help, right? In the moment to say, hey, I'm going to figure this out. Like I should be able to figure this out. And I know I feel that a lot of times when I'm looking up things, but I feel it is a point of humility to be, hey, like I need some help, but it's good, right? It's necessary. And if it's anything we read and everything we read, on the other side about well-being and development, and we talk about pride and ego and things like that and how we fit into just the world in general, right? And it's if you can put those things aside and just come out and open with it, then it allows for more collaboration. But then you find I'm not going to be stuck on this for 8 hours. Somebody might have an answer, right? We've got group chats because we have a bunch of people who work in a bunch of different teams, but we have talent that's spread out across, the organization. So, we have chats and group chats and things like that and places where people can go and post questions, right? It's an audience of all the developers. So you never know if there's another senior developer on the other side of the company who's working in a different area who may have solved your problem, but, and so being able to say, jump in and kind of reach out and have these sources, and that aligns with kind of EXP's whole model or the company's model in the sense that as agents, you have access to top agents from around the country and around the world, right? Not just the few people in your local office who you have to really, convince to share their knowledge, right? Because you're also working in their same territory and area. And so now it's like, oh man, the top agent who's good at this specific thing in this state across the country can give me advice doing that same thing here. And I have access to that person at my fingertips through the technology and because of how we manage the entire brokerage remotely.
The network, right? Yeah. It's an interesting point. And you were talking about, needing to be willing to ask for help or willing to discuss something. And in my mind, that's where this podcast came from, right? You and I have spent over the last 2.5 years, a lot of time talking through ideas. We'll lay out a problem or a challenge. We'll each go try to solve it, come up with our ideas on how we would attack it, what the right way is. And then we get together and talk about it.
Yeah.
How do we really go do this? And an hour later, we have a way better solution than either of us came up with individually. And we might have spent a week doing our research and planning out what we are, each of us separately. And then that hour or 2 hours together, we've come up with something that is far better and, much encompasses much, much more. And I think about specifically a lot of the work we've done in international, right? As we're looking at how everything goes together. I spend a little bit of time thinking about how I think we need to solve business problems and what it might look like. And you spend a lot of time drawing diagrams, and then we try to figure out how to put those things together and make sure that we're actually tying off all of the different pieces that have to happen. And it's a pretty amazing collaboration because we're both willing to ask for and offer the other help.
Right, exactly. In fact, I've been working on some architectural diagrams for some stuff recently that you asked me to work on. And I came to this point where I'm like, here's some components and I'm not really sure how they fit together. And I'm not going to spend any more time on this now. I see you've got some time next Wednesday open. So I grabbed that time and, and on my list, on my checklist, my to-do list of my stuff, I put that note in there like, hey, I put this much time into this today, but we're going to have to connect on this next week because I don't have enough information to finish this. And I'm not going to try to figure it out myself, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that's in there that's already been decided or stuff we probably need to talk out, right? And so in that too, I brought in the other developers who are involved in this because I know they're doing some more like if I'm doing a 30,000 foot diagram, they're doing the 30-foot diagram, right? Of the same process. Yep. And so
they're tying off the wires.
Exactly. So let's all get together. And let's collaborate on this, right? And then now it'll make us all more efficient at how we finish this task. But that getting together and working on it versus if I had spent the week like, man, I keep dragging this task out and I don't want to show Steve because I don't have this complete, and I don't know what this is gonna look like. Like those thoughts never cross my mind, but I know that they're there, so I bring them up just for example, right, in our conversation today. But that would be debilitating to me, right? That would prevent me from delivering, and enough of that would be just me. My performance would be very degraded, right? And a lot of
without a doubt. And I'm having that same sort of conversation in another spot, working on policies, where I spent 3 days writing a policy, and now it's been in review with a number of other people for the last week, and I'm starting to get feedback on it and some really great comments. But I had to just be willing to finish a version and then share it and set the expectation of what I wanted from each person that was reviewing it, right? That here is the help I need from you. I've done X. I need you to go review X and provide me this kind of feedback and look for the gaps. And together we're going to build a much better policy than we would have, with just me trying to write it. It just doesn't work that way. And again, as I'm thinking about the podcast and the people who might be listening, that's another one of those key takeaways. That's not a remote management thing necessarily, but it's a lot easier to do when you can bump into somebody after a meeting or walking by their queue and be like, oh, hey, can I borrow you for a minute to talk about this? You have to be purposeful when you want those interactions, when you want that help. So from a remote team management and how do I succeed, you need to, like, you said, Imran, you need that. I'm going to schedule some time that we're going to go talk about this, right? It's a work session, and you and I know that we'll whiteboard. We'll probably be, sharing a whiteboard, and we'll draw it out, and we'll move things around in the diagram, and it'll go left and right, and we'll argue about a bunch of stuff, and it'll come out much, much better, a much better chance of being successful.
Right. Because it's in those conversations, in those debates that we solve our problems or figure out the compromises that make the most sense for the two problems that we're both trying to solve on different sides. Right.
Yeah.
But without those conversations, without those interactions, we would be stuck. And those are things we take for granted because we have to put in time for those. If we were working in the same building, I might run into you in the hallway and be like, hey, Steve, I was drawing this diagram and I got a few questions. You got a minute? And we may just hop in and talk about it. But that's never going to happen here. I'm not going to walk around my apartment and run into you, hopefully, right? I don't know. You live like 6 states, 7 states away. At least to announce yourself first, phone call, right? But it's not going to randomly happen, right? I'd be expecting it, right? And so on that, you lose that sense, right? Or even that connection, like, hey, let's go grab lunch and just talk about this, right? Like those things just aren't there, right? And so for us, it's like we have to put that time in. And we have to put that time to connect. And the other thing is that we put in time on, that's what we're talking about here now, is our one-on-one meetings kind of take a different tone, right? Because there are career goals, right? I try to keep them to a point where they're not operational. Of course, things slip in, especially when there's not a lot of time and questions are burning. But, I like to use that as time to get to know people because this is that time. I'm big on let's go to lunch. And when I'm working somewhere in a building, and I want to get to know my coworkers, then, I'll take turns going to lunch with people or going to lunch with groups of people or something like that.
Right.
It's a place where we can just kind of interact and it's not operational, right? Most of our interactions become operational because they're so deliberate when we're at work, right?
Yes.
And we can chat.
Great point.
We have a pretty good culture. And I think, with something going on in a big group chat and everyone responding with their own version of the funniest meme, that relates to the situation. And that's kind of how we keep it light in a different way. Like no one's going to throw a beach ball through the cubicle form one day and kind of make it feel like it's cool. But, we do, we have those moments and I cherish those moments, right? Those are great. And,
agreed.
If I see something going on, I want to get in on it. Like, oh, I got this, and it's funny and it keeps it light, and I think it keeps that culture in a good way because we also don't know that you're the joker in the office or you're this person or that person or kind of how our demeanors are because it's in those moments that it comes out, because we should all be acting professional on the business side, and so our demeanor should be very similar. But where our personalities come out is in those moments when we're, can catch those little moments in between those moments of professionalism, say, hey, here's a little joke. that, whatever it is, right? But
Yeah, I know we had one earlier this week where somebody had asked a question and all of the answers were in memes. And I look at that and I'm like, wow, people someday are going to, review our civilization, 15,000 years from now
mhm,
and realize we went from hieroglyphics to amazing written words back to hieroglyphics.
right.
It's, it's it cracks me up. I liked what you said about the one-on-one time. I also do one-on-ones with, with all of my direct reports, all the people that I work with a lot. I have one-on-ones, and one of the folks on my team, um, he's also really good about that sort of thing. And in our recent one-on-one, he was basically coming back to me with the a direct question about how some of the rules that I think about, not really rules, but the guiding principles I use about being an adult and do your job, and if there's a problem, talk to me. And he had a problem, and he was really direct about it. He felt in that one-on-one space that, hey, this is how you say you are, and I have a problem. I want to talk to you about it. And it was very direct, and it was about me, and something that he was perceiving that I was doing in my relationship with him, and he called me on it. And I was like, wow, okay, you're 100% right. To call me on it. Let's talk about what that is. It ended up being a little bit different. It wasn't so much, the way that he was thinking about it had to do with trust. And I kind of had to recalibrate how he was seeing what I was expressing.
Right.
But it was amazing to me that we were able to use that, one-on-one time in a remote environment. We were doing it, I think, at that particular time, probably just as a phone call. I don't remember being avatars in world, but we were able to have that direct conversation, even in a remote environment that was about something that was important to him, because he was willing to, take that step and say, I do have a problem and I want to talk to you about it. And it ended up being a really great conversation, right? There's no, even when it's that sort of thing and it's something I'm doing, there's nothing wrong with that. I want that feedback. I want to know. And I think that's part of our culture. Those are the sort of things that when I do interviewing, I look for people who will flourish in a remote self-starter. You kind of have to manage your own time and be an adult and do your job kind of environment, right? It's important. Otherwise you struggle. We told that little story about a developer who didn't make it, developer A,
Right.
who didn't make it. And, he had pretty good answers when we did the interview, but it was pretty clear that they weren't really how he lived, right? There was some conversation about it, but it's not really how he did things. And we've had a few others that have done that, but for the most part, I think you and I have been very successful at building our remote team in understanding what we need from people, I don't want to say personality wise, but it's more along the line of their work ethic or their ethos or something that is clear that they really do want to be work from home and they want to be part of this, and they understand that it's well, I guess it's not really a great or rare, opportunity where you get to work from home, at least not now, but there is a lot of work that you have to do around it. And it's not just all super simple. You do have to put in the work.
You do. You definitely do. And so, those tenets of being disciplined and keeping track of your own work are definitely there. So I want to touch on one more thing, before we close out here that you were talking about. And I think it's that sense of your teammate being able to approach you about some kind of perceived, dissonance in y'all's interaction while you were, talking. And the fact that you were open to that conversation and able to have that, right, and take it. And that goes to this whole sense of being approachable. And it's that open door policy, right? Even though you don't have an office here. And I don't think open door policy really just means my door's open so you can walk in whenever you want. I think open door policy means I'm approachable so you can talk to me about whatever's on your mind. And you can still maintain that sense of being an approachable leader, an approachable manager, an approachable person in general, because that is what fosters that communication it allows your teammates to know that they can communicate with you well and that you guys can work on the dynamic. I bet your relationship is stronger now with that person. And the way that you guys are going to work together is going to be a lot better versus, something being held on to in a negative way, right?
Right.
But
100%.
we're all here. And exactly, like, not like you were being malicious. It was just, I didn't know that that's how it was being perceived. Let's talk about it and let's address it. And it's a real concern,
It definitely is. And that's a great point. You're right to probably to end on, but it's that idea of you have to be willing to be accountable for yourself. I've had other feedback from other people that they think when they come to me with something that I'm grilling them. And I think we've talked about this before. It's not so much that, it's that I want to know, I want enough knowledge about it that I can feel like I can be a part of the conversation. So I do try to be very open. I want to talk about whatever the ideas are. If you have a way you think you can improve whatever it is we're doing, I'm interested. If it's something I can do to make it better, I'm interested. I may have some questions for you. I may want to understand it so that I get that feeling, but that shouldn't be a deterrent to wanting to go and talk through it. And I think that's really a good way for me. It's a good way to go. It helps me to at least feel like I can have a meaningful interaction if I can ask you some questions. And I certainly don't want it to be that I'm grilling you, but
all right. Well, you want to understand, you want to understand the decision yourself. And so the questions are so you can get the input that the decision maker had when they made the decision, right?
Right.
And that's the only way to understand the decision is to understand all that went into it. And it tells you two things. One, that a lot went into the decision, right? It wasn't lightly made, right? Or you might find out it was lightly made. And if it was, or with not all the right information, right? Because we've talked about that before. You generally have a different view than I have, than my dev leads have, than developers have. And everyone has different information at their level on what's going on. And so for us, the most information that we can include, the better decision we can make. And we've talked about that. One piece of information can change the course of a ship, right? Yeah. And so
for sure.
For us, it's like making sure that the right information was used in the decision, and if not, being able to offer it up. Or confirming it was and say, all right, this is the best choice. Let's roll with it.
Yeah. Right. Maybe you had all the right things and you had all the right reasons. And by you, helping me understand where you're coming from, I'm going to be right there along with you. And I want to be, right alongside you as we're cheering this on and making it happen. I think that'd be fantastic.
Cool. Well, all right. You want to lead us out here then?
Yeah. So I want to thank you for your time today on, talking about remote teams and management. I think for all of the people that were listening, the key takeaways here are, set your expectations, be willing to talk to people, be available, be present. That doesn't mean be in your seat from 8 to 5 every day. That means make sure that when you are working, that you're actually working and that you can focus and that you can communicate your time. Obviously, if you're the manager, you can help set this culture. If you work for a manager, you have to get them to buy in, right? You need to work in a style that works for everyone, and it takes more than one person to make this work. And I'm super fortunate to have you, Imran, involved in this because you fit right into this idea. And I think you've really made it your own, and the culture, in the development team has been amazing, right? They all get it. And it's pretty awesome team to work with, even though we don't actually all get to sit next to each other in the same room every day.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really do appreciate your leadership style and the way that you approach, that sense of how we work together and the fact that we're all adults. Because when you allow us to be adults, then we can definitely, do it in a good way.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much.
All right. Catch you next time. Cool.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Architect and the Executive, a podcast by Imran Kassam and Steve Ledwith. We hope you enjoyed this episode and encourage you to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. All of our episodes, show notes, and articles can be found on our website, thearchitectandtheexecutive.com. Thank you.